The train screeched as it came to a slow, hissing stop against the endless horizon of dust and sky, and Clara pressed her gloved hands together in her lap, her heart a storm of fear and anticipation, for she was about to step onto soil she had never touched before, into the arms of a man she had agreed to marry without ever laying eyes on him, a cowboy from the far stretches of the West who had paid her passage and promised her a new beginning, though her mind whispered endless questions. What if he hated her at first glance? What if he was cruel? What if she had left everything familiar behind, only to find herself a prisoner of regret? But the promise of escape from her bleak life back east had burned brighter than fear, and so here she was, smoothing the creases of her worn dress and clutching the single carpetbag that held all she owned, the steam from the locomotive rising like ghosts behind her as she lifted her chin and stepped down onto the platform, her eyes darting nervously over the crowd until she saw him, a tall figure standing apart, broad-shouldered, hat tilted low, boots planted firmly in the dust as though he belonged to the earth itself. And in that instant, her breath caught because though his frame was imposing, his stance carried not hostility but patience, as if he had been waiting for her all his life. Yet doubt pricked her heart and she braced for the coldness she had convinced herself would come. But when she reached him and murmured her name, his hand came forward, rough from work yet gentle in intention, and his voice, deep and warm like the earth after rain, spoke words she had not dared imagine. Welcome home. And in that fragile instant, something inside her shifted, for instead of dread, there was the trembling spark of hope. And though she told herself not to trust too quickly, her spirit leaned toward his kindness like a flower toward the sun. Still, the journey ahead was not to be easy, for whispers of judgment swirled from the townsfolk who eyed her with suspicion, muttering about a woman purchased like freight, and Clara's heart wrestled between shame and defiance, for she had come here for freedom, not chains. And though she barely knew this man, this cowboy whose hand had steadied her, she felt the pull of a story yet to be written, one laced with trials that would test the strength of two souls searching for love in the harsh landscape of the West. And as they rode away in his wagon across fields of gold and sky, she found herself stealing glances at him, the set of his jaw, the quiet focus in his eyes. And each time he caught her gaze, he offered a faint smile that told her he knew she was afraid, yet he would not condemn her for it. And inside she wondered if perhaps she had not been sold into misery, but invited into something she had yearned for all her life, a place, a family, maybe even love. But shadows lingered, for Clara carried scars of mistrust from men who had treated her as less than human, and though this cowboy's words had been tender, she feared they might fade once the novelty wore away. So she resolved to guard her heart, to tread carefully, though fate had a way of unraveling even the tightest knots. And as the wagon bounced along the dusty road, toward the ranch that would now be her home, she noticed the land was both unforgiving and breathtaking, much like life itself, and she wondered if she had the strength to belong here. Yet when the ranch came into view, sturdy fences stretching across the plains, cattle grazing under the watch of the setting sun, she felt something stir inside, a sense that she was stepping not into a cage, but into a chance, fragile and precious. And as he helped her down from the wagon, his hand lingering just long enough to steady her trembling form, she realized that sometimes home was not a place, but a person who dared to speak words of welcome when the world expected rejection, and though the trials ahead would test them both, this was only the beginning of a story where hate had no power over love, where two broken paths might join into one. And as the first stars appeared in the endless western sky, Clara lifted her head, breathed deep the air of her new life, and whispered to herself that maybe, just maybe, she had been brought here not to survive, but to finally live. And dear listener, if you felt the stir of Clara's courage and the warmth of that cowboy's welcome, I invite you to join our journey by subscribing to this channel. For more stories of love, resilience, and hope await you here, and your support keeps these tales alive. guiding more hearts toward light even in the darkest of times. The first nights on the ranch tested Clara in ways she had never imagined, for though she had stepped into the cowboy's home with hope trembling in her chest, the silence of the wide prairie and the weight of uncertainty pressed against her spirit, making her wonder if she truly belonged here. Yet each morning she awoke to the smell of fresh coffee brewing on the wood stove and the sound of boots across the floorboards, and each morning she found him already at work, tending to cattle, fixing fences, his strength woven into every motion, and though he spoke little, the few words he offered carried a sincerity that lingered in her heart, stirring questions she could not yet ask, but time, she knew, had a way of unraveling the mysteries of people's souls, and so she watched him, quietly learning, noting the way he tipped his hat respectfully to neighbors, the way he never raised his voice, even when storms of frustration rumbled, and each evening when he returned, his hands raw from rope and reins, he would pause at the doorway, glance at her with eyes shadowed by exhaustion yet softened by something she dared to believe was kindness. And in those moments Clara felt her defenses falter, as though her heart, so long locked away, was beginning to stir. Still, shadows of doubt clung to her, for whispers from town reached her ears, women gossiping at the mercantile, men smirking at the saloon saying that a mail-order bride was nothing more than a desperate woman bought to fill loneliness, and though she tried to hide her hurt, their words cut deep, reminding her of every rejection she had endured before. But one evening, when her tears slipped silently as she stood washing dishes, the cowboy stepped beside her, placed his calloused hand lightly on hers, and without judgment simply said, "Don't let them steal your worth. You're more than what they see." And in that moment something cracked open inside her, for no man had ever spoken to her soul before. No man had looked past her fear to see her as more, and she realized that perhaps she had not been brought here to endure hate, but to discover the truth of love. Yet trials loomed, for the ranch itself demanded more than affection, and one fierce storm swept across the plains, tearing down fences, scattering cattle, leaving ruin in its wake. And as thunder roared and rain lashed against the windows, Clara's instinct was to cower. But when she saw him ride out into the darkness, risking his life to protect what they had, her heart surged with fear and admiration. And without thinking she lit lanterns, prepared rope, and when he returned, soaked and weary, she was there, ready to tend to him, her hands trembling as she wiped the mud from his face. And in that fragile silence he caught her gaze and whispered, "I'm glad you're here," words simple yet heavy with meaning. And in them Clara found the courage she thought she had lost. For now she knew she was not merely a guest or a burden. She was a partner, a presence that mattered, and slowly, over nights spent watching the fire crackle and days spent laboring side by side, laughter began to rise where silence once lingered. Trust grew where fear had taken root. And Clara discovered that love did not always come with fireworks and sudden passion, but with quiet gestures. An extra piece of bread saved, a horse saddled for her morning ride, a blanket tucked around her shoulders when she fell asleep by the fire. And these things wove themselves into her heart like threads of a tapestry, until she could no longer deny the truth. She was falling in love with the cowboy who had welcomed her home. Yet life tested them still, for rumors spread of land disputes, of neighbors jealous of the ranch's resilience. And one bitter man confronted them, sneering that Clara was nothing but a purchase, a reminder of the cowboy's loneliness. And though his words stung, Clara lifted her chin and, with newfound strength, declared, "I was not bought, I was chosen, and I chose to be here." And her voice rang steady against the wind, leaving the man silenced, for she had claimed her place, not as a burden but as a woman of worth. And when they returned home that night, the cowboy, eyes glistening with pride, took her hands and said softly, "You've given me more than I ever hoped for." And in that moment, beneath the starlit sky, Clara realized that love had grown not from escape, but from courage, from choosing each other in a world that often tried to tear people apart. And though she knew trials would always come, the storms, the gossip, the endless labor. She also knew they would face them together, and that was enough. For when a heart finds a hand that says welcome home, even in the darkest times, it finds the courage to keep walking forward. And Clara, who once arrived expecting hate, now carried love so fierce it could weather any storm. And as she stood beside the man she now called her husband, gazing at the horizon where dawn broke over the land, she whispered a silent promise to herself that she would never again let fear steal her hope. For home was not a place she had found, but a love she had chosen. And that choice had made her free. And dear listener, if this journey touched your heart, if Clara's courage and the cowboy's gentle strength reminded you that love conquers even the harshest trials, I invite you to subscribe to this channel, where more stories of faith, resilience, and romance await. Because each tale we share is a light against the dark. And with your support, those lights will only grow brighter.